Okay, guys, welcome back to the review. So we're going to continue where we left off. These questions say, use the unit circle to find the values of the trigonometric functions below. So what I did is I filled out a unit circle. So this is what we did on our paper plates, but I just have it as an image and I put it here so that we can look at it. So just a few things to remember about the unit circle. It has degrees, so 0 through 360. Also has radians, so all the way to 2 pi. Quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4. The points are always going to be cosine, sine, and then I just added tangent to the ends because we usually use that one. Okay, so let's look at those questions. The first one says to find tan of pi over 6. So I'm going to look for pi over 6. It's right here. And then tangent is just square root of 3 over 3. Okay, next one says to find cosine of 210. So let's find 210. It's right here. So if they want cosine, that's the x value. So negative square root of 3 over 2. Okay, these two at the bottom are a little bit more difficult than that. So this one says sine of 495. So as we already know, the unit circle only goes up to 360. But what we can do is find the coterminal angle. So what I'm going to do is get 495 minus 360, and that gives me 135. So instead of finding sine of 495, I'm going to find sine of 135 because it's going to land in the same area anyway, like it's a coterminal angle. So let's find 135 right here. So the sine value is square root of 2 over 2. Okay, and then that last one, sine of negative 3 pi over 2. So this is kind of the same thing. The unit circle only has positive angles. It doesn't have negative. So we're going to find a coterminal angle by adding a full rotation. So if I add 2 pi, that's a whole circle, I can get a coterminal angle. The only thing about adding 2 pi is our fraction here has a 2 at the bottom, so we need to convert this to a fraction that has 2 at the bottom. So this would be 4 pi over 2. When you simplify it, 4 over 2 is 2. So these are equivalent, but I just have it now in the way that I need it. So negative 3 pi over 2 plus 4 pi over 2 gives us just positive 1 pi over 2. So instead of looking for sine of negative 3 pi over 2, I'm going to look for sine of positive pi over 2. So let's find pi over 2. It's right here. And they wanted the sine, so that's just going to be 1. So unit circle, we have all the information there. It's going to be on your plates. So this one should hopefully be at least 2 questions that are pretty easy to find. Okay, the rest of this is not hard, but a very tedious. It has a lot of steps. It's the graphing of the trig functions. You have to be able to recognize the characteristics, so stuff like amplitude and period and shifting up and down, left and right, and getting the equation from the graph and also graphing from the equation. So on the test, it is both. So we're going to start with 14 and 15. We already have the picture of these graphs. What we're trying to do is determine the equation. So you'll notice that for number 14, it says f of x equals a sine of bx plus d. So a few things. This is going to be sine. So we have to treat it like a snake shape, right? Also, there's only a, b, and d. There is no c. So they're telling you that this one didn't shift. It did not shift left or right. It's only these 3 transformations that we need to look for. Okay, so I think the easiest one to find is D. So D is the midline. Usually, if you're good at looking at graphs, you can eyeball this. and just be like, this looks like the middle right here. But if it's not that easy for you, what I would do is look for the maximum. So maximum is at 1. Look for the minimum, that's at -3. So that makes 1, 2, 3, 4 squares. So in the middle would be 2. So that is going to be our midline. And that controls D. So this graph went, it went down 1. Because it should have been at the origin, it went down 1. Okay, from here we can find A. A is just the amplitude, so how far away are the max and min from that midline? That controls A. So that's, for both, should be the same, 2 squares. So our amplitude is 2. Okay, the only thing that we need to, so we have A, we have D. The only thing we need to find is B. So the thing to remember about sine is that period is supposed to be 2 pi divided by B. What is the period for this graph? So we know that there was no horizontal shift because we didn't have a C, so I know I need to start at 0. I'm going to complete one of my snake shapes. So how long or how wide is that shape? It's 2 squares. So that is actually the period, and that is pi over 2. So we're going to work backwards to find B using this formula. 2 pi over B is equal to pi over 2, and we're going to solve. So we cross multiply. So B pi equals, and then cross multiply the other way. 2 times 2 is 4, so that's 4 pi. Then because there's pi's on both sides, they basically cancel, and B is 4. Okay, so now we have all three. We can write the equation of this function. F of x is equal to, we said, 2 sine 4 x, and then it went down 1, so minus 1. So I just got those numbers from 2 was the amplitude, 4 was B, we solved for that, and then since it went down 1, was minus 1. There was no C in this equation. Okay, the next one, it's pretty much the same thing, only this time, here's our new graph. They want us to look at it as a cosine of bx plus d. So just like the last one, there is not going to be a horizontal shift, just because it's difficult to see that. It's only going to be those 3 transformations, but this time they want us to think of it as cosine. So that means that we're looking for a cup shape. Okay, so let's start by finding the midline. So our highest point is here. Our lowest point is here, so I'm going to count the squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So midline would be 3. 1, 2, 3. So that lands right there on the 2. That's D. So this graph actually went up 2. Okay. Then amplitude, just count how far away the max is from the midline and the min. So each time it was 3. So A is 3. The last thing we need to find is period. So again, period for cosine is 2 pi over B. So we're going to see what the period of this graph is. So first we're going to find our cup shape. So go all the way down, back up. There's our cup shape. So that is one period of this graph. So this entire area makes up one period. So how long is that? Well, if you look at your labels, that's period equals 3 pi over 2. So this one's going to be a fraction, but we can still work it out. So we're going to cross multiply like we did before. B times 3 times pi is just 3b pi. then cross multiply the other direction. 2 times 2 pi is 4 pi. Since they both have pi, we can cancel that. We just have 3b equals 4, but then I'm going to divide by 3 so that b can be by itself. b equals 4/3. So now we have all three numbers that we need. We can write our equation. F of x equals 3 cosine of 4/3 x, then it went up 2, so plus 2. Okay, so that is writing the equation given the graph. There are questions like this on the test. Luckily, it's multiple choice, so hopefully that'll help you out a little bit. And also, you are allowed to use your calculator. So if you really wanted to, you can graph it on your calculator and see which picture looks the closest to what's on the test. Okay, but you also have to know how to do it the other way. Given the function, can you sketch the graph? So that's what the last two questions are about. I have one tangent and one secant. So for tan, before we even get started, I just want to remind you of what one period of tan would look like. So we have an asymptote, we started at upper critical point, and then it kind of makes half a parabola up. There's an asymptote. Then there is a lower critical point, and it goes half down. So this space here, that's one period of tangent. For tangent, it's pi. This is the only one where it's pi. There's a midline. That's D. Then this space between the midline and these critical points, that's A. And then B would affect here. C tells us where we're going to start. So I know that's a lot of information to just kind of review real quick, but you also have more detailed notes in your notebook. But this is what we're going to try to graph. Okay, so this one is 2 tangent 2/3 x minus pi over 2. So for this one, we have A, B, and C. There is no D. So for our midline, since there is no D, it's going to be at 0. So this would be right on top of that x-axis. That's going to be our middle. C is pi over 2, but since it's minus, that means that we're going to go to the right. So pi over 2 to the right. Here's our pi over 2. That's going to be kind of our starting area because of C. Now, B is 2/3. So this one I need to do a little bit of math. Okay, so to find period, it's pi divided by B. So instead of dividing by that fraction, what you can do is multiply by the reciprocal. So period equals 3 pi over 2. So I know there's a label right here that says 3 pi over 2, but we started 2 away from 0. So that label, we want to go 2 to the right as well. So our period's going to end on top of the 2 pi. So just make sure that that space is 3 pi over 2. Another way you can do it is that 3 pi over 2 takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares. So starting from C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares. Okay, and then A was 2. So starting from our midline, be 2 up and 2 down. Okay, so that little figure that I drew here, for tangent, there is an asymptote right in the middle. So I'm going to draw that first. Then, on the left side, it has an upper critical point and then it points up. So, upper critical point, it's going to be here at D plus A, so somewhere here. But you want to space things evenly. So we're going to put it right here on the edge where C was at, and then go up. So there's our half a parabola. And then on the other side, we need to do D minus 8, our low critical point, and point downward. Okay, so that is one cycle of tangent, but we need to repeat that until we run out of space. So what I'm seeing is that half of the period is 3. So if I went half the other way, so 3 this way, I need to have another asymptote there. And then once I have that, looks like asymptote is every 6 squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Then I'm going to complete this parabola and go upwards. And then this one would go down. And so it looks like I have space for another one. So right in the middle would be here. And then just make sure your parabola is pointing down. And I think that's all that fits. So there is our graph of tangent. So don't worry, the test is multiple choice. You're not going to have to draw it out, but you have to be able to identify it when you see it. And I am going to be trying to trick you with these answer choices, so just be very careful. Okay, and then this last one is secant. Okay, so secant, again, just as a reminder, starts with an asymptote, also ends with an asymptote, and has one right in the middle. Then there's the midline, of course. Midline is not normally something you would see, but midline is D. You'll have a parabola pointing up and a parabola pointing down. That space between the parabola and the midline, that's A. This area here, that period, is 2 pi divided by B. I already gave you D, and C would be here where you started. So this is all the stuff that we're going to put onto our graph. So we have secant 2 of x plus pi over 4, then minus 2. So this one does not have an A. It has a B, C, and D. So D is the easiest one to graph, I think. It's the midline. So our midline is going to be at minus 2. C is pi over 4, but since it's plus, we are going to go to the left. So pi over 4 is right here. I know that because pi over 2 is 2 squares, and 1/4 is half of that. Then B is 2, so we need to find out what the period for this one would be. So to do that, 2 pi divided by B, so it's just going to be pi. Pi is 4 squares, 1, 2, 3, 4, but we need to count 4 from C, 1, 2, 3, 4. So right here, that is 1 period. And then since we didn't have an A, that's an invisible 1. So we're going to go 1 up and 1 down. Okay, so now let's start trying to graph this. So like I have drawn here, secant begins, ends, and then right in the center has an asymptote. So the pattern is every 2 squares, so I'm going to go ahead and draw all of them in. We're going to have to finish off this graph anyway. Okay. Then I need to have a parabola that is on the upper side, but make sure that it is touching that upper critical point. So here is the midline. D plus A would be 1 up. So starting from here, and then that parabola needs to point up. Then the next one needs to start at the lower critical point and point down. Okay, and then just continue this until you run out of space. So you can see I'm not being like super careful, but I am trying to be as accurate as I can. Okay, and that's what that graph would look like of secant. So with the graphing, make sure that you're able to identify what each of these numbers will do to your graph. Your answer choices are going to be 4 different graphs, so you have to identify the correct one. Luckily, you're not going to have to try it on your own. And that is it for our review. Let me know if you have any questions over anything that we covered.